In the vast emptiness of space, a sleek alien ship moved silently through the stars. Its name was the Zorath*, and it belonged to a species far older and more advanced than humanity. Inside the ship, Commander Varric stood in the control room, staring at the blue-green planet floating ahead. Earth. It was beautiful, but also unpredictable. For centuries, his people had observed humans from afar, studying their behavior, their wars, and their inventions. And for centuries, they had followed one rule: avoid fighting humans at all costs. Nearby, Kale leaned forward, his large, dark eyes fixed on the screen showing images of Earth. He was younger than most of the crew, curious about the strange creatures that lived on the planet below. "Why do we always run?" he asked, breaking the silence. "They're just beings like any others. Why not talk to them?" Varric turned to look at him. His voice was calm but firm. "Because they are different," he said. "Humans may seem weak, but they have something no other species we've met possesses. They adapt, they change, and when cornered, they fight with everything they have." Kale frowned. "But isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't we respect them for it?" Varric sighed. "Respect doesn't mean trust. We've seen what happens when humans feel threatened. They don't back down. They find ways to win, even against impossible odds. That's why we watch and wait instead of engaging." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away on Earth, Jake Carter sat inside a small military outpost in Alaska. The cold wind howled outside, rattling the windows as snow piled up against the walls. Jake sipped his coffee, staring at the blinking lights on the radar screen. Something wasn't right. There were dots moving near the edge of Earth's atmosphere, too fast and too silent to be satellites. "Lisa, come take a look at this," Jake called out. Dr. Lisa Monroe walked over, her blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She peered at the screen, narrowing her eyes. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Jake admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not natural. Could be debris, could be something else." Lisa crossed her arms. "You think it's aliens?" Jake shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I've been reading too many sci-fi books. Either way, we should check it out." The two loaded up their gear and headed into the snowy wilderness. Hours later, they found what they were looking for: a clearing where the snow had been disturbed. In the center lay strange burn marks, perfectly circular, as if some kind of craft had landed there recently. As they examined the area, movement caught Jake's eye. He raised his rifle instinctively, pointing it toward the trees. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Lisa. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It wasn't human. Tall and slender, with smooth gray skin and glowing eyes, the creature held up its hands in a gesture of peace. Behind it, two more figures emerged, equally alien but equally cautious. Jake hesitated. His finger hovered over the trigger, but he didn't shoot. The creature tilted its head, studying them curiously. Then, slowly, it reached into a pouch at its side and pulled out a small device. A soft hum filled the air as the device projected a series of symbols into the sky. It wasn't English, but somehow, Jake understood the message. Asterisk, we mean no harm, asterisk. Lisa stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. "Who are you?" she asked. The creature pointed to itself and made a sound that resembled Kale. Whether it was a name or a title, Jake couldn't tell. But one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. Jake lowered his rifle slightly, though he kept it ready in case things turned dangerous. Lisa stood beside him, her breath visible in the cold air as she tried to process what was happening. The alien, Kale, watched them carefully, its glowing eyes flickering between the two humans. It repeated the gesture with the device, projecting more symbols into the sky. This time, Jake and Lisa recognized a pattern. It seemed like an attempt at communication. "Maybe it wants to talk," Lisa said softly, glancing at Jake. Jake nodded but remained cautious. "Let's see what it does next." Kale took a step closer, holding out the device again. When neither human reacted aggressively, it pointed to itself once more, Kale, and then gestured toward Jake and Lisa, waiting. After a moment of hesitation, Lisa touched her chest and said, "Lisa." Then she motioned to Jake. "Jake." Kale tilted its head, as if processing the information. It mimicked their movements, pointing to each of them while repeating their names. The effort felt clumsy but genuine, and for the first time, Jake felt a flicker of curiosity instead of fear. Maybe these creatures weren't here to harm them after all. The other two aliens stayed back, watching silently. They didn't seem hostile either, but their presence made Jake uneasy. He glanced at Lisa, who gave him a small nod. She trusted his judgment, and he knew they had to make a decision soon. Staying out in the freezing wilderness wasn't an option. "We should take it back to the outpost," Jake said quietly. "If we can figure out how to communicate better, maybe we'll learn why they're here." Lisa hesitated. "What if it's a trap?" "It might be," Jake admitted. "But if we leave now, we'll never know. And if they wanted to hurt us, they could have done it already." After a long pause, Lisa agreed. Turning to Kale, she pointed toward the direction of the outpost and said, "Come with us." To her surprise, Kale understood. It signaled to the other two aliens, who nodded and retreated into the trees, vanishing without a sound. Then Kale followed Jake and Lisa, stepping cautiously through the snow. The walk back was tense but quiet. Kale moved slowly, taking in everything around it. The towering pine trees, the icy ground, the distant mountains. Every so often, it would stop to examine something, like a patch of moss or a frozen stream. Lisa noticed how curious it seemed, almost childlike in its wonder. She couldn't help but feel a little sorry for it. Alone on an unfamiliar planet, trying to connect with strangers who probably scared it just as much as it scared them. When they reached the outpost, Ryan Blake, another soldier stationed there, immediately raised his weapon. "What the hell is that?" he demanded, glaring at Kale. Jake stepped in front of Kale, raising a hand to calm Ryan down. "It's not dangerous," he said firmly. "At least, I don't think it is. We need to find a way to talk to it." Ryan scoffed. "Are you serious? You brought an alien into our base. Do you even know what it's capable of?" "Neither do you," Lisa interjected, stepping forward. Her tone was calm but firm. "We have a chance to learn something important here. Isn't that worth the risk?" Ryan didn't look convinced, but he lowered his gun. For now. Inside the outpost, Kale looked around curiously, its wide eyes scanning the walls lined with equipment and maps. Lisa grabbed a notebook and began drawing simple pictures: a sun, a tree, a person, to see if Kale could understand. To her relief, it responded by copying the drawings and adding its own, including what looked like a spaceship. As hours passed, the tension eased slightly. Kale used its device to create more projections, showing images of stars, planets, and finally, Earth. It pointed to Earth repeatedly, then gestured toward Jake and Lisa. It was clear. Kale's people were interested in humanity, but not everyone was willing to trust. Ryan muttered under his breath about potential threats, pacing anxiously near the door. Jake ignored him, focusing instead on building rapport with Kale. For the first time, he allowed himself to hope that this encounter might lead to something greater than fear or conflict. The next morning, the atmosphere at the outpost was uneasy. Ryan Blake still didn't trust Kale and made no effort to hide it. He kept his distance, glaring whenever he thought no one was looking. Jake and Lisa, on the other hand, were determined to make progress. They spent hours trying to communicate with Kale, using gestures, drawings, and even basic tools like flashlights to mimic signals. It was slow work, but they could tell Kale was doing its best to understand. Kale seemed fascinated by everything around it. At one point, it picked up a metal wrench from a workbench and turned it over in its hands, studying it closely. Then it pointed to the walls of the outpost and mimicked the shape of the wrench, as if asking how the structure had been built. Lisa smiled and nodded, pointing to herself and then to the walls. "We built this," she said slowly, emphasizing each word. Kale tilted its head, then repeated the motion, tapping its chest and pointing to the walls. It was hard to tell, but it almost looked like it was saying it had helped build something too, perhaps its own ship. The idea excited Lisa, and she scribbled another drawing in her notebook, a spaceship surrounded by stars. Kale responded immediately, touching the picture and making a soft sound that might have been agreement. Despite these small breakthroughs, tensions continued to simmer. Ryan wasn't the only one feeling uneasy. Other soldiers stationed at the outpost whispered among themselves, questioning whether bringing an alien inside was wise. Some argued that Cal could be gathering information about Earth's defenses, while others worried it might call for reinforcements. Jake tried to reassure them, but his words only went so far. Things came to a head later that afternoon. Jake and Lisa were showing Cal a map of Alaska when Ryan stormed into the room. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, pointing at Cal. "We don't know anything about it, or what it's capable of." Jake stood up, his voice firm. "That's why we're here, to learn. If you can't handle it, stay out of the way." Ryan clenched his fists, clearly angry, but before he could respond, Cal suddenly activated its device. A bright light filled the room as complex symbols appeared in the air, spinning and shifting rapidly. Everyone froze, unsure what was happening. For a moment, it felt like the entire outpost vibrated with energy. "What did you do?" Ryan shouted, stepping back toward the door. Kale quickly shut off the device, raising its hands in a gesture of peace, but the damage was done. The sudden display had startled everyone, and fear began to take hold. One soldier reached for his rifle, aiming it at Cal. Lisa stepped forward, putting herself between them. "Stop," she yelled. It wasn't attacking. It was just showing us something. Jake moved quickly to defuse the situation. "Put your weapons down," he ordered. "No one's shooting anyone here." Reluctantly, the soldiers lowered their guns, but the tension remained thick. Ryan shook his head, muttering under his breath, "This is a mistake. Mark my words, we'll regret this." As the day wore on, Kale became quieter, clearly sensing the shift in mood. It stayed close to Jake and Lisa, avoiding the others. Lisa noticed how its glowing eyes dimmed slightly, as if it were sad or afraid. She couldn't blame it. Being surrounded by suspicious strangers would unnerve anyone. That evening, Jake pulled Lisa aside. "We need to figure this out fast," he said. "If things keep going like this, someone's going to get hurt." Lisa nodded. "I know, but we're running out of time. We have to find a way to prove Cal isn't a threat, or at least convince the others to give it a chance." Jake sighed, glancing over at Cal, who sat quietly in the corner. "Let's hope we can." But deep down, both of them wondered if trust could ever truly be built between humans and aliens, or if fear would always stand in the way. That night, the outpost was quiet except for the hum of the heaters and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. Jake and Lisa sat at a small table with Kale, trying to piece together more about its intentions. They had set up a makeshift communication board, filled with simple drawings and symbols. Each time Kale pointed to something, Lisa wrote down notes in her journal, hoping to find patterns or clues. Kale seemed eager to share. It used its device again, this time projecting images not just of stars and planets, but also of strange battles, ships exploding, beings falling, chaos everywhere. Lisa frowned as she watched. "Are these wars?" she asked, pointing to the projections. Kale nodded slowly, mimicking the action of fighting by pretending to hold a weapon. Then it shook its head firmly, crossing its arms over its chest. The message was clear. War was bad. Jake leaned forward. "Is that why you're here? To avoid war?" Kale hesitated, then nodded. It touched its chest, then pointed to Earth, making a calming gesture with its hands. Lisa thought about it for a moment. "You're saying your people don't want to fight us," she said slowly. "But why? Why avoid humans specifically?" Kale paused, as if searching for a way to explain. He'd reached out and tapped Jake's wristwatch, then pointed to the walls of the outpost, the snow outside, and finally the sky. Lisa's eyes widened. "Because we adapt quickly," she guessed. "We change our environment to suit us." Kale nodded enthusiastically, adding another image to the projection. Humans building cities, launching rockets, creating technology. Then it showed humans standing side by side, united, even in the face of danger. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. "They've seen what we can do," she whispered to Jake. "Our ability to survive, to innovate, it scares them." Jake rubbed his temples, thinking hard. "So your people watch us from afar because they think we're dangerous," he said to Kale. "But you're different. You came here to learn, didn't you?" Kale tilted its head, considering the question. Then it pointed to itself, then to Jake and Lisa, and made a motion like two hands shaking. Jake smiled faintly. "You want to understand us better." The conversation gave everyone a lot to think about. As the hours passed, Lisa began to see Kale in a new light. It wasn't just an alien visitor. It was a representative of a species that had learned painful lessons from its own history. She wondered how many times humanity had come close to self-destruction and realized that maybe Kale's people weren't so different after all. But not everyone shared her perspective. Ryan and the other soldiers remained suspicious, huddled together in the corner of the room, whispering angrily. When Jake approached them later, he found Ryan pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath. "This is insane," Ryan said when he saw Jake. "How can you trust it? For all we know, it's feeding information back to its fleet right now." Jake crossed his arms. "And for all we know, it's telling the truth. We won't get answers by treating it like a prisoner." Ryan scoffed. "Answers? What answers could possibly justify risking our lives? If they decide we're a threat, they'll wipe us out without hesitation." Jake sighed. "Maybe. Or maybe they're giving us a chance to prove we're worth knowing. Isn't that worth taking a risk for?" Ryan didn't respond, but his expression said enough. He wasn't convinced, and neither were the others. Later, as Lisa reviewed her notes, she noticed Kale watching her intently. It pointed to her notebook and made a questioning sound. She smiled and handed it over. Kale flipped through the pages, studying the sketches and scribbles. When it reached a drawing of Earth surrounded by stars, it paused, touching the page gently. Then it looked up at Lisa, its glowing eyes softening. Lisa felt a pang of sympathy. Whatever Kale's mission was, it clearly cared about finding common ground. But with fear and mistrust growing among the humans, she knew their fragile connection was hanging by a thread. The uneasy peace at the outpost didn't last long. Early the next morning, a loud explosion rocked the building, sending everyone scrambling. Jake grabbed his rifle and rushed to the window, heart pounding. Outside, the snow was lit up by flashes of light as alien drones zipped through the air, firing energy blasts that tore into the ground. The attack had come without warning. "What's happening?" Lisa shouted, ducking behind a table as debris flew everywhere. "It's them," Ryan yelled, pointing toward the sky. "They're attacking." Kale moved quickly, its glowing eyes wide with alarm. It grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him away from the window just as another blast hit the wall, shattering glass and sending shards flying. Kale activated its device, creating a shimmering shield around itself and the humans nearby. The energy barrier blocked the next wave of attacks, giving them precious seconds to regroup. "We need to get out of here," Jake yelled over the noise. "Now." Lisa nodded, clutching her notebook tightly. "Where do we go?" Kale gestured urgently toward the forest, signaling for them to follow. Jake hesitated but realized they had no choice. Staying in the outpost would mean certain death. "Everyone, move," he ordered, motioning for the others to fall in line behind Kale. As they ran into the freezing wilderness, the drones pursued, their weapons lighting up the darkened sky. Kale stayed at the front, using its device to deflect stray shots and create distractions. One drone exploded midair after colliding with an invisible force field Kale summoned. Another veered off course, crashing into the trees. Despite the chaos, Jake couldn't help but feel a flicker of gratitude. If not for Kale, they'd already be dead. But questions swirled in his mind. Why were these drones attacking? Was this part of Cal's plan, or was something else going on? When they finally reached a rocky outcrop, Kale stopped and turned to face the group. Its expression was tense, almost apologetic. It pointed toward the horizon, where faint lights indicated the presence of more alien ships. Then it touched its chest and shook its head firmly. "They're not with you," Lisa guessed, her voice trembling. "These attackers, they're from your people, but they don't agree with you." Kale nodded, confirming her suspicion. It made a slashing motion across its throat, indicating danger. Whatever faction these drones belonged to, they weren't interested in peaceful contact. Ryan glared at Kale, his distrust boiling over. "This is your fault," he spat. "You led them straight to us." "No," Jake interrupted sharply. "If Kale wanted to hurt us, it could have done it already. Look at what it's doing, protecting us." Kale stepped forward, its movements urgent. It pointed to itself, then to the distant ships, and finally to Jake and Lisa. The message was clear. It needed their help to stop the attackers. "How are we supposed to fight against that?" Ryan demanded, gesturing toward the drones still circling above. "We don't fight," Jake replied firmly. "We figure out how to end this before anyone else gets hurt." Lisa nodded, turning to Kale. "What do you need from us?" Kale hesitated, then held up its device. It tapped the side of its head, mimicking thought, and then pointed to the largest ship in the distance. Jake understood immediately. "It wants us to get a message to its leader, to explain what's happening." "But how?" Lisa asked. "We can't just walk up to their ship." Kale activated its device again, this time projecting a map of the surrounding area. It highlighted a narrow canyon leading toward the alien fleet. The path was risky, but it offered cover from the drones. Kale looked at Jake and Lisa expectantly, waiting for their decision. Jake took a deep breath. He knew the odds were against them, but surrender wasn't an option. "Let's do it," he said. "We'll follow your plan." As they prepared to move, Kale placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, its glowing eyes filled with determination. For the first time since their encounter began, Jake felt a real connection, not just between two species, but between individuals fighting for the same goal: survival. The journey through the canyon was treacherous, every step fraught with danger. The icy wind whipped at their faces as Jake, Lisa, and Kale moved cautiously between towering walls of rock. Above them, the alien drones continued their relentless pursuit, scanning the area with sharp beams of light. Each time one came too close, Kale raised its device, creating brief bursts of interference to throw it off course. Lisa clutched her notebook tightly, her fingers numb from the cold. She glanced at Jake, who was leading the way, his rifle slung over his shoulder but ready to use if needed. Despite the tension, she couldn't help but notice how different things had become since they first met Cal. What had started as fear and mistrust had turned into something else, something fragile but real. They were working together now, united by a shared purpose. Kale paused suddenly, holding up a hand to signal the group to stop. It pointed ahead, where the canyon opened into a wide clearing. In the distance loomed the massive alien ship, glowing faintly against the dark sky. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Kale gestured for them to stay low and motioned toward a cluster of boulders nearby. They crouched behind the rocks, catching their breath while Kale studied the ship intently. Jake leaned closer to Lisa. "Do you think this will work?" he whispered. Lisa hesitated before answering. "I don't know, but we have to try. If Cal's people are divided, Maybe we can help fix that. Kale turned to them, its expression serious. It touched its chest, then pointed to the ship, and finally to Jake and Lisa. The message was clear. This wasn't just about saving themselves. It was about stopping a conflict that could escalate into something far worse. As they prepared to make their move, Kale activated its device again. This time, instead of shielding them, it projected a series of symbols into the air, a code of some kind. The symbols hovered briefly before shooting upward like a beacon, disappearing into the night. Moments later, a loud hum filled the air as the ship responded, lowering a small pod toward the ground. "That's our ride," Jake said under his breath. He glanced at Kale. "You sure this is safe?" Kale nodded firmly, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in its glowing eyes. Together, the three of them approached the pod, which opened silently to reveal a sleek interior lined with strange controls. Kale gestured for them to climb inside, taking the central position to operate the device. The ascent was smooth but nerve-wracking. Through the transparent walls of the pod, Jake and Lisa watched as the alien ship grew larger, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. When they finally docked, the doors slid open to reveal a corridor bathed in soft blue light. A group of aliens stood waiting, their expressions unreadable. One of them stepped forward, an older figure with intricate markings on its skin. Kale bowed slightly, speaking in a series of melodic tones. The leader listened carefully, occasionally glancing at Jake and Lisa. Then Kale held up its device, replaying the footage of the rogue drones attacking the outpost. The room fell silent as the truth sank in. The leader exchanged a few sharp words with Kale, who responded calmly but firmly. Finally, the leader turned to Jake and Lisa, raising a hand in what seemed like a gesture of apology. "They understand," Lisa murmured, her voice full of relief. "They see what happened." Jake nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time since this ordeal began, he allowed himself to hope, not just for peace between humans and aliens, but for understanding. As they followed the leader deeper into the ship, Jake realized that Kale had been right all along. Sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons. They were won by choosing to trust, even when it felt impossible. Inside the alien ship, Jake and Lisa followed Kale and the leader down a long corridor. The walls shimmered faintly, glowing with patterns that shifted like flowing water. Despite the beauty around them, Jake couldn't shake the tension in his chest. They were deep inside an alien vessel, surrounded by beings who could crush them without effort if things went wrong. But Kale walked confidently beside them, occasionally glancing back to make sure they were keeping up. The group entered a large chamber filled with strange equipment and screens displaying images of stars, planets, and Earth. The leader gestured for everyone to stop, then turned to face Jake and Lisa. It spoke in soft tones, its voice melodic but firm. Kale translated as best it could, using gestures and fragments of their earlier communication system. "It wants to know why humans fight so much," Kale explained, pointing to Jake and Lisa. Lisa hesitated before answering. She thought about all the wars, conflicts, and struggles humanity had faced throughout history. "We fight because we're afraid," she said slowly. "Afraid of losing what we have or not having enough. But we also fight to protect the people we care about." Kale relayed her words to the leader, who tilted its head, considering. Then it pointed to itself and made a sweeping motion toward the room, indicating its own kind. "We used to fight too," Kale translated. "But we learned it only brings pain. That's why we avoid others, especially humans." Jake frowned. "So you watch us from afar because you think we're dangerous?" The leader nodded, adding more details that Kale struggled to explain. From what Jake understood, the aliens saw humans as unpredictable, capable of incredible creativity, but also devastating destruction. Their policy of non-interference wasn't just about fear, it was about survival. Before anyone could say more, alarms blared through the ship. Red lights flashed, and the leader barked orders to the other aliens. Kale turned to Jake and Lisa, urgency in its glowing eyes. Torin, it said, naming the rogue faction responsible for the attack on the outpost. They're here. Moments later, the ship shook violently as something collided with it. Kale grabbed Jake and Lisa, pulling them toward a secure corner of the chamber. Through the windows, they saw another alien ship hovering nearby, firing energy blasts. Torin's forces weren't giving up. The leader shouted commands, and several aliens rushed to defend the ship. Kale stepped forward, addressing the leader directly. It pointed to Jake and Lisa, then to the rogue ship, making a clear demand. Let them help. After a brief hesitation, the leader agreed, handing Kale a small device linked to the ship's systems. What do you need us to do? Jake asked, gripping his rifle tightly. Kale guided them to a control panel, showing them which buttons to press to activate the ship's defenses. Lisa worked quickly, following Kale's instructions while Jake kept watch. Together, they managed to launch countermeasures that disabled one of Torin's ships. The victory was short-lived, though. The remaining ships retaliated with even greater force. As the battle raged outside, Kale led Jake and Lisa to a secure transmission room. Using the device, Kale sent a message directly to Torin's fleet, exposing their betrayal and proving that the humans were allies, not enemies. The transmission ended with footage of the outpost attack, leaving no doubt about Torin's guilt. Back in the main chamber, the leader watched the unfolding events silently. When the rogue ships finally retreated, it turned to Jake and Lisa, bowing slightly in gratitude. Kale smiled faintly, its body language relaxed for the first time since their journey began. You did it, Lisa whispered to Kale. You stopped them. Kale shook its head. We did it, it replied, pointing to all three of them. For the first time, Jake truly understood what Kale had been trying to teach them. Trust wasn't easy, but it was worth fighting for. The alien leader gave one final nod to Jake and Lisa before turning to address its crew. Its voice was calm but carried a tone of authority, and the other aliens immediately began working to stabilize the ship. The rogue faction's attack had caused damage, but it wasn't severe enough to threaten the vessel's survival. Kale stayed close to Jake and Lisa, its glowing eyes dimmer now, as if drained from everything that had happened. We should go back, Jake said quietly, looking at Lisa. Our people need to know what happened here. Lisa nodded in agreement, but we can't tell them everything. If word gets out about this, it could cause panic. Kale tilted its head, listening to their conversation. It pointed to itself, then to Earth, mimicking the act of staying silent. Jake smiled faintly. You're right. We'll keep your secret, for now. The leader approached them once more, holding out its hand. In its palm was a small, smooth object that shimmered faintly. It pressed the object into Jake's hand, speaking softly. Kale translated. A gift, a reminder of trust. Jake looked at the object, feeling its weight in his palm. It was warm, almost alive. He slipped it into his pocket without saying a word. Kale escorted them back to the pod that would take them to Earth's surface. As they prepared to leave, it paused, its expression thoughtful. Then it touched its chest, pointed to Jake and Lisa, and made a gesture like two hands shaking. Lisa understood immediately. You're saying goodbye. Kale nodded, its glowing eyes softening. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jake stepped forward and extended his hand. Kale hesitated before reaching out, its fingers brushing against his. The touch was gentle but meaningful, a symbol of everything they had been through together. When the pod descended back to Earth, Jake and Lisa sat in silence, watching as the alien ship vanished into the clouds. The cold Alaskan air greeted them when they stepped outside, the outpost now just a short walk away. Neither of them spoke until they reached the safety of the building. What happens next? Lisa asked, breaking the quiet. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. We report what we can, just enough to explain the attack. But the rest stays between us. Lisa nodded, glancing at the notebook still clutched in her hands. She flicked it open, staring at the sketches and notes she'd made during their time with Kale. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe knowing they're out there, watching over us, not as enemies, but as observers, it's enough." Back aboard the alien ship, Kale stood alone in the observation deck, gazing down at Earth. The blue-green planet was breathtaking, full of life and potential. It thought about Jake and Lisa, their courage, their curiosity, their determination to understand. They weren't so different from its own people, not really. They just needed time to grow. As the ship turned away from Earth, heading back into the depths of space, Kale whispered softly to itself, "This is why we avoid fighting humans. Because even when they're afraid, even when they doubt, they find a way to hope." Far below, Jake and Lisa stood on the frozen tundra, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, among the countless lights, was proof that humanity wasn't alone. And that peace, however fragile, was always worth striving for.